Hello, my name is Arnis, and I'm going to be talking today with Peter Gamwell. Peter and I had a conversation about a few weeks ago, and we talked a bit about his work as a school leader, as a system leader, and the amount of interest that he had in promoting creativity and problem solving in his schools and in his educational system. And so we had a robust conversation about that in terms of why that's important and why school leaders should really keep that paramount in their view. What I'd like to talk with Peter about today is what are some of the actions that school leaders, let's say in this case, a newer school leader who's moving into a school or a district, what can that leader do to build trust among the staff? That leader is going to be coming into a position where the previous leader may or may not have had trust. The previous leader may be leaving on good terms, and so you want to follow up on that, or in bad terms, so you want to repair that. What are the kinds of things a newer leader has to keep in mind and to really sort of start with in order to be effective? Peter?
Well, good afternoon, Arnie. Great to be back with you. Yeah, trust is the single most important thing in any learning organization. And I can't remember who said it now, but change occurs at the speed of trust, and it's absolutely true. And for me, what I believe lies at the core of this is the degree to which people believe that they have voice within the organization. Because if they feel free to use their voice in ways that are contributing to the overall culture, well, that has to be in the context of trust. So how do you get to that? How do you create a culture in which people feel confident to use their voice and to provide them with some choice? And I think the first thing as a leader that you need to do, whether you're new or not, you need to take the temperature of the organization. And the way I've addressed that in the past, both on a smaller scale in schools, but also at a district-wide level, is you ask them, you create a survey, and you ask very blunt questions like, to what degree do you feel comfortable expressing your opinions with this organization? To what degree do you actually do that? Do you feel that your capacities as an informal leader have been allowed enough space that you can really step forward to make a difference? So posing those types of questions, and then on the other side of the question is, what can we do? What can we do as an organization, as a school, to increase that opportunity for you? And the next thing that you have to do is the most difficult thing as a leader, because you're going to hear things you might not want to hear, okay, about what the current culture is. But then you have to stay true to the task. By the way, don't go through the process of the survey if you don't intend to do something serious about it, because people will see right through that immediately. So that's a no-no. So you gather that information. And by the way, you gather it in many different ways because people will want to express themselves in different ways. So through surveys, through one-on-one conversations, through small group conversations, however people want to feed it back, that's what you need to do. And when you've identified the key themes coming back at you, feed it back as soon as possible in the context of a full meeting. I don't just mean teachers, I mean the entire staff, so that everybody gets to hear this. And it also really immediately demonstrates your commitment to flattening the hierarchy, because as I think you understand, it's my belief that when you flatten the hierarchy of an organization, if you expect brilliant ideas to come from anywhere, they will. So feed the information back to the full group and then say something like, so what are we going to do about this? Look, we've got amazing possibilities within this organization. There's a lot of brilliance that lies within each one of us. What are our next steps to make sure that this culture is one of trust and where you feel that you can use your voice? And there needs to be a genuine collaboration. And I'm a great believer in celebration. So I think this needs to be ongoing throughout the school term. Every couple of weeks, you have celebratory sessions where you feed back on the process so far, the ideas, you create your narrative of leadership. I believe that's very important. What are your beliefs about leadership and learning and voice within the school? And the narrative will emerge, or the vision, if you will emerge from the findings of those feedback sessions. And then it's really, really important the practical action is taken based on the feedback that you're getting. Once you start to do that, and once people see that you're really serious about it, that's how trust evolves.
Peter, the surveys can be oral, they can be written. I take it in a small group, large group. It's sort of, surveys are a loose term for just getting feedback and information,
Yes.
The way that you're phrasing it, I think. Okay. So the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was very interesting is sort of the leadership narrative.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times leaders come into a system with their notion of leadership already embedded.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that what you're saying is that instead of doing that, come in and hear what the issues are, hear what the possibilities are, hear who you're working with,
Yes,
and then build your leadership from there. Is that correct?
that is absolutely correct. So it's funny, we went through this process at the school district back in 2002. We brought together 24 people representing all of the employee groups, and we had external partners involved as well. And we did a couple of readings. We read some Margaret Wheatley. We read an article on emotional intelligence and leadership, and we read something on distributed leadership. And at the end of those readings, we said to the people, well, what's your perspective on leadership? And there was a deafening silence. And it only occurred to us later that the reason there was a silence is because we had school custodians sitting next to school superintendents, early childhood educators sitting next to principals. And there was nervousness. There was clearly a lack of trust. Anyway, at the very end of the meeting, we did get some conversation going. One of the gentlemen put his hand up. We tell this story in the Wonder Wall. And he said, Peter, why am I here? And I said, excuse me? He said, why am I in this meeting? And I said, well, we are trying to gather an understanding of leadership that's going to, and a definition of leadership, which is going to resonate with everybody across the district and throughout into the community. And so we need to get as many perspectives as possible for us to build that narrative, because if it doesn't resonate with everybody, what's the point? And it turned out that the person asking the question was Mike, a custodian at a high school. And he said, I got to tell you, I've been in this school district for 20 years, and nobody has ever given me any indication that my voice matters. So for me, that really it moved me in the fact that we were onto something here, that this is the way forward, that you do need to get diverse voice within that. And no matter what you think your beliefs about leadership may be, the more you hear different opinions, the more you need to be open to shifting your opinion.
That's interesting. I remember when I was a teacher a number of years ago, I wasn't a leader of the school at that point. I was working in a graduate program.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I kind of did by accident is I really got to know the school custodians, and there was sort of a secondary assist to all that, which is because I knew them, they were perfectly happy to open up the gym and let me play basketball pretty much anytime I wanted to. Right. So it's not just about leadership; it's also about what you want to get.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
And and maybe I should have gotten to know the cafeteria folk. That would have helped out too.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So Peter, as a school leader, I've started to think about the narrative. And I know that I want to have a narrative in which my staff is thinking in creative ways and innovative ways. As you have written about in different papers, it's important to think creatively, but also to think innovatively about the problems we're facing now and will be facing in the future. So in order to have your staff on board with that, first step, I'm sure, then is to build trust. But the second step is to inspire them, I think, to be confident, to take chances. So what are kind of the actions or the thought process that you go through in that sense?
Um, so really, it all comes back to at every of you've got to live it. Who is it that said you've got to be the change you expect? Well, I think I've just made a mess of that, but you get the concept. You've got to live it every day in every interaction, just like a teacher in a classroom. If a teacher is disingenuous, the kids are going to be all over that. They can see through that in an instant. And it's the same thing with formal leaders in the school. You have to be genuine. You have to lead with your heart and not with your head, although it's a balance there, of course. And you have to be open to any ideas. One of the things that I'd like to express here is this, and it is the degree to which trust is so pivotal. One of the founding characteristics that we believe, myself and Jane, about leadership, there has to be that much trust, and this is borne out by the research into psychological safety. In fact, the pinnacle of psychological safety is that you feel so comfortable that you know you can collide with ideas within that organization, and it's through scientific progress will speak to this, but that's how progress occurs when different ideas collide and you forge different and novel pathways forward. But you've got to have that level of trust within the culture where people feel that they can step out there. And I do want to tell another story of this because it's a beautiful story. In one of the schools when I was a superintendent, there was a little guy in a kindergarten class, and he was having some dreadful trouble, behavioral issues in the classroom. And the school custodian, of all people, became really concerned about this. Everybody was concerned, but he posed the question one day, what is going on with him? Because he was sort of having to clean up the mess in the classroom, right? From the things that have been thrown around. And so him and the teacher and the principal sat down, and Josh said, what does he like? What does this little boy like? So rather than saying, what's the problem? He wanted to know what he liked. And the teacher said, well, he likes keys. And Josh said, well, I got keys. So they, to cut a long story short, developed this program where this little guy would help Josh out around the school. And yes, he would be able to unlock the paper cupboard and go in and carry the paper to the classrooms. Josh then realized this was having a pretty profound impact on this little boy. So the next year, he opened it up into a green club. And now there wasn't just one little person benefiting from this mentorship. There were 15 of them. So that wouldn't have happened in a culture where the principal wasn't open to a very different form of an approach.
Mm-hmm. Was it the sense of responsibility that the child had? Is that what kind of turned things around, or what do you think it was?
I think it was. It's very hard for me. I'm not a psych. What I can tell you is the impact on the mum. And we tell the story of the Wonderwall. And when I called her and asked permission, she said, absolutely. If in the telling of this story, one other child is helped, then it's worth it to me. It had a profound impact, not just on the little child, but on the parents, of course. So I think it was the fact that he was given a place of belonging, that Josh took him under his wing and took great care of him and gave him responsibility. I think it's a combination of all of those things.
And just to go back to that once more, did that sort of carry over furthered through and on this child's academic career? Do you know?
I can't speak to it now, but that's an interesting question. I've been thinking about going back and following up with the mom, and I actually will, and I'll let you know when I get back. But it certainly had an impact over at least that year.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you about, you kind of already hit, which is as a school leader, as a system leader, you want to build confidence to do things, to try new things in your staff, but you also want to build that confidence in your students because if they're out there and they're extending themselves and they're, whatever their interests are not being met in some instances, but boy, in the school, this is where I can really do these things. They're going to get that much more excited. What should a leader be thinking about? What should a leader be doing to build confidence sort of up and down the line with everybody?
It's a very similar thing. I'm working with a school in Osgood now. I think I referenced this in the first time we spoke, where the principal, he actually read the latest book, Thinker, Learner, Dreamer, Doer, and he set up a book club with his staff. And now I'm following up. I'm going to do a case study for a year with one of the teachers who has really flipped the classroom. So it's given her confidence because she's getting support from the school principal to do things in a very different way. And I think maybe the story that we tell in the Wonder Wall, the kindergarten story again, really encapsulates how I think that once you give people this confidence to do things a bit differently, it starts to take wings. I was walking past a kindergarten classroom in a rural school close to Ottawa, and I look in and there's these 4 mini, what would you call them, kindergarten-sized conference tables. So I look in, there are 4 children sitting around the first one with what turns out to be the teacher. So I look in and I said, what's going on in here? This looks fascinating. And the little guy looks at me and he beckons to me. He said, come on in, it is fascinating. Come and join me. So I go in, sit down at the table. So what's happening? So Gloria, the teacher, points over and she said, do you see that whiteboard over there? And I look over and I said, yeah. He said, that's our wonder wall. I said, what's a wonder wall? She said, well, when the kids are curious about something, these 4-year-olds, when they're wondering, we encourage them to go and write it down, preferably in the form of a question. So this little guy had written down in his own inimitable way, how does the human body work, was his first question. The second one was, how do my eyes stay in my head? And the third one was, how does the skin stay on my body? And of course, it was written. You had to be very clever to interpret what was actually written. But they were the questions. So, based on that, they found 3 other little people who were interested in the human body. So this was the kindergarten expert panel on the human body. So they had a chart in front of them, and the first column was the pictures of the different parts of the human body. The third column was the names associated. And in the center, they were explaining what they already knew about the different parts of the body. So anyway, I said, well, show me how it works. So she said to the little guy, what's this? And she pointed to a picture of the intestines. And he turned out to be a bit of a drama guy. So he's knocking himself on the head and he's looking all confused. And he looked at me very aggressively, pointed at me. He said, I used to know this, I said, well, apparently you don't. Apparently you don't now. Anyway, it was hilarious.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
It sounds like he had Alzheimer's.
That's right. So anyway, off he goes, and the teacher changes the cover, and then he puts his hand up. He said, I've remembered. She said, what is it? Oh, the picture was of the intestines, right? So he said, it's the intesticles. Well, of course, by now the teacher bursts. We're trying not to laugh, but it's so funny. Anyway, it was a sort of a joyful moment. It was especially joyful because we went and called his parents and let them know this hilarious story. But the point about that story is, sure, yes, it's funny. But for me, that whole concept of the wonder wall, I think it provides an incredible metaphor for how we need to flip the model of conventional learning so that the students guide the learning as opposed to the curriculum. And just as with staff and community, when you give voice and choice to kids, this self-direction, it makes the learning matter. And that's what really matters. If it doesn't matter to the kid, as I'm afraid is the case in many learning environments, they're not really going to get involved properly. So most importantly, I think, yes, go on.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it strikes me that many of your examples are younger children, kindergarten, elementary grades, and such. And I'm just curious whether the concepts that you're talking about, whether the kind of curiosity and innovation that you're trying to foster, whether that works equally well at older grades and in the high school level.
Absolutely, it does. There are many wonderful examples that I'm actually working with right now, where when you give kids this open space. So I'm in this classroom yesterday, this biology classroom, okay, and it's very differently run. The kids are in triads around the room, and they're given questions or provocative ideas, and they have to talk through it amongst themselves. But at the end of all of this, they can express their understanding in any way they want to. They create projects, they create whatever they want to do and however they want to do it. So at the end of the classroom, we're going into lunchtime, and I happened to notice one of the young ladies. She would be about, I guess she's 15, 16, she's grade 11, and she's sitting down. And I said to the teacher, what's she up to? Oh, she said, that's Mia. She's drawing a mural to represent her understanding of evolutionary biology in the Arctic. So I got a 3-minute interview with this kid, which almost brought me to tears. It's so, yes, if you give, and I remember asking, like, why shouldn't the teacher just be at the front giving you information and you writing it down and you passing it back on? I said, why is this important to you? And she said, because it allows me to express my understanding in a way that's meaningful to me. Yes, I'm going to be doing a pamphlet to go along with this to explain in more detail, but this allows me to feel it. And I see that time and time again when I go into these types of classroom that really allow kids to make sense of the world in a way that the world makes sense to them. And I'll be blunt, unfortunately, there are far too few of those classrooms out there.
Is there any restriction in doing or trying to create classrooms like that, in the sense of people are graduating from high schools, they are hopeful of getting into colleges, and they have to have GPAs, they have to have exam results and all that. And this doesn't necessarily do that. This is creating projects, fascinating as they are. Do you get any kind of pushback about, well, how is this going to play out further down in their careers?
I think people convince themselves that there is a great divide between these two approaches. There's not. This teacher, Jen, she has all manner of different students going off to high school, to university, to college. They get amazing grades. So it's not. There's nothing written in the statutes that say you have to give quizzes and exams. It's not there. There's a lot more flexibility than I think people will allow themselves to understand. And I put some blame on the status quo for this. I put a lot of blame in terms of, I think that the leadership of school districts needs to be much more intentional now in terms of encouraging this different approach. Because I think it's, as I said in the last interview, the arguments over whether a transformation of learning is necessary, I think, is pretty much over. I mean, you've got a lot of very, very smart people around this world saying this loud and clear. Our dear friend Yong Zhao is probably one of the clearest in how he expresses this. So it's somebody somewhere in the world, some school district somewhere has got to be brave enough to stand up and say, this is the convention is not good enough. It is not good enough because all we do is we put numbers onto kids, and kids aren't numbers, and we definitely can't use that approach to prepare them for this complex future when they're going to need to know themselves really, really well, and to have this incredible commitment to their community, and for us to have them be the change makers that we are going to so desperately need them to be.
I understand that, and that's really a great spot, I think, to sort of conclude this session. But before I do, let me ask you if there are any sort of further thoughts that you have about this. Because we were trying to put aside about a half an hour to do this, and we're almost there. So, any kind of concluding ideas for this particular session?
I think that I'm a great believer in the approach of appreciative inquiry. And through appreciative inquiry, we live in a world that is so filled with problems that what we tend to do is focus on the problems and try to solve them all. Well, quite clearly, that's not possible. So we need to flip that, take an appreciative inquiry or a strength-based look. And it's what I try to do through my work is put a spotlight on some of the magic that's happening out there, and to use that to shape and inform how we need to move forward into the future.
I was going to end, but I have a follow-up question I just have to ask.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about appreciative inquiry, because that's a term that I think is going to be pretty new to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah. Well, it's a form of inquiry where it's sort of loosely based on positive psychology. We mentioned our dear friend Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi last time, and it takes a completely different approach. So, for example, let's take the idea of strategic planning. Commonly in a strategic planning session, the hierarchy of the organization is taken off into the woods in a cabin. There's bears all around, so you can't escape. The stale sandwiches there. And the first thing that happens in the morning is they'll likely say, well, what are the problems we have with our organization? And 8 hours later, the blackboard or the whiteboard has disappeared because of all the problems that people have come up with. And then, of course, the leaders of the organization are delighted because now this justifies the next 4 days' work. How are we going to solve these problems in the pursuit of a strategic plan? What the appreciative inquiry folks would do, and there's a full cycle, and maybe it's a topic for another 15, 20 minutes. They flip that and they say, what's the magic? What is the potential magic that we have in our organizations? What are the extraordinary things that we would like to accomplish? And how are we going to make that happen? So it utterly changes the framework. And it actually puts people in a much better frame of mind, because rather going down the rabbit hole of problem solving, which can be a very depressing approach, now you're opening up possibility. And it's a beautiful framework that can be used on the globe, on the big scale. It can be used in a family. It can be used in a plumbing company. And we drew upon it. We leaned heavily on that approach during the 14 years of the creativity and leadership movement at the school district.
So it's a strengths-based inquiry rather than a deficit-based inquiry.
Absolutely.
So I think maybe that's something we should explore a bit further the next time we talk, because I think that's going to be very important to this whole idea of creativity and innovation. But I think right now we've kind of reached our time, so I'll stop the recording.
Great. Thanks, Arnie.